We have been talking about the call of God and knowing if God's called us. And I've kind of gotten to a place in the study that I have a checklist in mind that you can use to see if you really believe that God's calling you. And so we went over this. Do you have an all intense, consuming desire for the work of God? Is it something just eating your lunch and you want to do it, you have to do it, you feel like God's really pushing you that way? Then I ask you the next question: did God place a necessity on you? Do you feel like it's a burden that he's put on you? And if you don't do it, woe is you. God is going to be upset. It's God's called you and you don't really have a choice. Then another thing I've often used is, does your heart stir you up? Does your heart stir you up? There's a Bible story in the book of Exodus, chapter 36, and verse 2, and it just seems to me to be pretty much a picture of the call that God gives us for any ministry he calls us to do. Moses called Bezaleel and Aholiab and every wise-hearted man in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom. It's God that gave him the wisdom. And then even everyone whose heart stirred him up to come into the work. That's an Old Testament picture of a New Testament truth. God gave him the ability to do it, and God gave him the desire to do it. Has God gifted you with the ability to carry the gospel, to be a missionary, to pastor a church, whatever it is God's calling you to do? And then has God placed in you, has your heart stirred you up? Do you feel hungry to do it? No one can explain it. It's different for everyone. But something happened to you. You knew it then, and you know it in the worst of times in your life. You'll always remember it, and you need to remember it. When it gets tough, and the devil's on your back, you'll need to remember this. You didn't choose it. He chose you. He put the unnatural but spiritual desire in your heart. He put a necessity on you. He put the woe on you. He stirred up your heart. Don't let anything rob you of that. Don't let yourself, a friend, or the devil try to explain it away. He called me. It's a most precious gift in our walk with God. Another evidence I think you can depend on is others can see the hand of God in your life and in your ministry. See, God burdens you, but he helps you live a life that meets the ministry requirements. He gave you the ability. Your pastor saw it in you. The men that might ordain you the ministry see it in you. Not only do you think God's called you, but other people see it too. You see that God has placed something in you, that you're different. You don't have to feel worthy of it. You're not. But it's something beautiful. God in heaven has placed his hand on you. And you wouldn't be happy without doing anything else. You couldn't do anything else. The Bible says in Galatians 6:9, let us not be weary of well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. You see, God's call on you is strong, and God confirms his will to you. He confirms it because he opens doors for you when you go to preach. He blesses you when you preach and souls get saved. He lets you see your funds raised. He lets you see whatever happened is like God's stamp of approval on you and on your ministry. So I challenge you to follow the example of Paul. If God's called you to his service, be like Paul. Know that it has nothing to do with you and all to do with God and his purposes. It's not for your glory, but for God's glory. Being allowed in the ministry and giving you great grace and blessings and riches and wonderful privileges, not what will get it done. Paul said he would waste any of that, but he wouldn't waste the grace of God. God's grace would not be in vain in Paul's life. Paul would accept what God was doing in his life, and he wouldn't take it lightly. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 10, the Bible says, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace which was bestowed on me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Paul said, boy, God gave me his grace, but I'm not going to waste it. You see, God has allowed you God has approved you. God is trusting you. And God is going to use your life to change eternity. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 2:4, but as we were allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, which tries our hearts. Much comfort comes when you consider God is the one that's working on your desires. It's God that's giving you that desire. It's God that makes you feel the hunger to be a bishop or an overseer. We aspire and desire and wish for what God places in our heart. God gives us the ability to do the work. So God works in you the desire and the ability. God gives you comfort. Philippians 2:13, the Bible says, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. It's God who's making that difference. So I'll come back to you with some other things the next 2 days as we go over the call, and I hope it'll help it to be meaningful to you. God bless you.